Namaste. A very good afternoon to all of you here. At the outset, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. And it is my great pleasure and honor to offer some really brief insights on a topic of fundamental significance, especially in the context of the theme of this wonderful conclave, rebooting to a meta era. And I would also like to extend my gratitude to the India Foundation, to Shri Ram Madhav ji and all of you in the audience for this opportunity. And I humbly submit that, given my topic today, a careful study of ancient Indian trade routes and business networks provides an astonishing range of practical and implementable futuristic solutions for shaping policy, for extending the reach of India's economic influence, for thinking about new and innovative solutions in the realm of transport, that is putting it mildly, and trade, commerce, and above all for spreading Indian culture, and all of this in an embracive fashion. And so to reboot India to the meta era, it is necessary to unearth a substantial treasure which is buried in our own backyard and which has largely been forgotten. By itself, today's topic is quite encyclopedic, and I can only offer a very high-level panorama in the space of this session. So I'll focus only on two major areas. The first is the awesome network of trade routes in ancient India and the system of pan-Indian mobile economy, mobile as not in mobile phones as we understand it, but moving in that original meaning of the word. So offer a few insights on this pan-Indian mobile economy, which has a technical name known as Sartha, and which we look into as we progress. So with that brief intro, we can dive right in. So in our verifiable experience, it is clear that travel in general is pleasure and profit, or both, depending on an individual's temperament and outlook towards life itself. So normally, what is the picture that comes to our mind when we think of roads in the contemporary context? So the picture that immediately comes to mind is the awesome network of our national highways, various state roads, and all these roads today are exclusively associated with high-speed automobile travel. But to fully appreciate one of the basic backdrops to our discussion today, we have to transport back ourselves to ancient India and visualize the scene so far back in time. In other words, we have to pretty much literally recreate the physical features of India, at least in your mind. And I'll give you a rough picture of that scene. So when we think of ancient Indian roads or road networks or routes on which are various kings and pilgrims, monks, adventurers, merchants, businessmen, all of them traveled, we will have to momentarily forget our modern highways, which typically, cut through lush green fields of buildings and factories or water bodies on either side of the road. They bypass villages and towns and so on. And just like how it is in our own time, in ancient India as well, we had numerous large cities, but as you are all aware, majority of the people lived in villages, and most of the country back then was covered with thick forests through which all these roads passed. And these roads were often infested with wild animals, robbers, and so on. And in fact, robbery is perhaps the second oldest profession in the world, second only to politics. And there's a reason the term robber baron was coined. So anyway, all these factors back in ancient India in that period, they made it impossible for a person to travel alone in that period. And this was the germinator of the system of ancient India's awesome mobile economic network. And in fact, it was, one of the most powerful engines of our economy of ancient India was known technically as Sartha or caravan. The word can also be split as Sa plus Artha. And right there in the word Artha, we have money, finance, or economics. And like I said, the subject is truly vast, it is checkered, and it is infused with a breathtaking amount of detail And tragically, research in this area is yet to fully blossom with the seriousness and the depth that it merits. And in fact, Sartha system is one of India's greatest and highly original gifts to world civilization itself. And as far as ancient India was concerned, it formed one of the central pillars of our national economy. And remember, we are talking of undivided India that included Afghanistan also and Burma also. So this caravan system or Sartha system was literally a mobile economic universe by and in itself, and the system functioned like a well-oiled machine for more than 2,000 years. Perhaps the most profound facet of Sartha was the fact that it was also the mobile carrier of Indian culture and spirituality to foreign nations. And when I say foreign nations, it includes a vast geography that included all of Central Asia, Syria and Turkey on this side, and Burma, China and Japan on that side. So I'll just give you a small example to illustrate, how encompassing this system was. So as early as the 2nd century BCE, there was a Chinese ambassador named Chang Qian. He traveled from China all the way to Valhika or Balhika, which is also known as Bactria. And when he went there, he was surprised to witness a thriving market for Chinese bamboo in Bactria. So he began making inquiries and, he got the answer that, all these Chinese bamboos were originally coming from Yunnan province and that they were the finest in the whole world. But, which led to another question. So this ambassador asked them, but how did these bamboos arrive here in such large numbers? And the answer he got, caravans from India first brought them from Yunnan all the way to Assam, and from Assam, these caravans transported them to Bactria. So, interestingly, the Mahabharata describes Bactria or Valhika as a city that produced the finest breeds of mules, and that people of this trading city dealt extensively in Chinese silk, pashmina shawls, jewelry, perfumes and other luxury items. And for centuries, Bactria was a melting pot of 4 ancient civilizations: India, Persia, the Scythian region, and China. And in every sense, it was a truly international market where merchants from all these nations traded their goods. They gave rest and food and water to the animals and exchanged culture and music and lyric. So our story today begins at the southern gate of the city of Balhika. This gate directly, one route, it had many different routes. Balhika city had many different routes. So one of the routes directly led to mainland India. On the first leg of this route, it crossed the Hindu Kush mountains and the Sindhu river, and it opened at the prosperous commercial city and the ancient world's educational magnet, Takshashila, which is today in Pakistan. So in a way, this was a starting point of one of the oldest routes in the world, and within India, it is still known as the Grand Trunk Road, or whatever is survived of it. Interestingly, Kautilya calls this route as the Haimavat Patha, or the route of the Himalayan mountain range. He also says that this route was explicitly used for transport and trade in horses, wool, clothes, hides, rugs, carpets, furs, to the exclusion of all the other goods. So it was a specialized trading route. And almost in direct contrast, Kautilya says that Dakshinapatha, or the route leading to southern India, was used for trade in items such as conches, seashells, diamonds, all kinds of precious stones, pearls, and gold. Kautilya also gave guidance of sorts regarding the most optimal use of this route for commercial purposes, and he says clearly, the best sector on this route was that which proceeded to the mining districts. And we'll look at a few points on this one. So anyway, now let's return once again to Takshashila. So from this city, one more branch of the grand route continued again into mainland India, and it eventually split at Mathura. At Mathura, it branched off again, and this branch led to Pataliputra or Patna, and finally it culminated in the flourishing port city known as Tamralipti, which is today called Tamluk in Midnapur district, West Bengal, at the mouth of the Bay of Bengal. The word Tamralipti is derived from the Sanskrit word tamra or copper because it was available in the region in enormous abundance, and copper was mined at Ghatshila in the Singhbhum district, and it was transported to the port. And if you look at this unbroken continuity of Indian civilization and culture from those ages, even today, the public sector unit, Hindustan Copper Limited, carries on extensive mining operations in the same region. The Tamralipti port is also one of the oldest in the world, having a continuously recorded history of around 3,000 years. And the ancient Pataliputra Tamralipti sector was heavily protected and patronized by all kings, because it obviously contributed substantial revenues to various empires. And we'll just give a small example. Ashoka, for example, he sent his son Mahendra and his daughter Sanghamitra to supervise the transportation of the sacred Bodhi tree all the way to Sri Lanka. And the voyage began from Tamralipti, and in fact, this port was also a great hub for trade and cultural exchanges from India to Suvarnabhumi, or roughly speaking, today's Burma and Thailand. In fact, for centuries, the Bauddha Dharma literally went on a voyage to Southeast Asia via this one port. So now we have to get back once again from Mathura. I hope I'm not confusing you. So another branch from Mathura, it led to Ujjain, and culminated this side at another busy seaport. This was the seaport of Bhrugukacha or Bharuch, located on the Gulf of Cambay. And when we trace the history of all such ancient commercial sites, it is clear that it is not at all a coincidence that today the Gulf of Cambay continues to remain as one of the major sites of marine archaeology in India, and it continues to give us invaluable knowledge of the history of ancient India. So next we can briefly look at some of the other important trading and mercantile routes and hubs of northwestern and western India, and finishing with southern India. But before that, we can mention perhaps one of the most important feature of this extensive trading network, which is its awesome endurance and durability over countless centuries. In fact, after the establishment of all these routes since untold antiquity, most of them have remained intact all the way till the downfall of the Mughal Empire. For example, one of the most ancient trading routes was between Lahore and Kashmir. So Lahore was the starting point, Kashmir was the end point, and this route passed through Gujarat. So what picture does that give us about, the thriving prosperity of our trade? So here's a partial list of all the great highways, branches of highways, and numerous other trading routes, cities, and towns, starting with ancient northwestern and northern India. So in no particular order, I'll just read out a few names. Bamiyan, all of you are familiar, which is now in Afghanistan, where the Buddha statues were blown apart. Next we have Purushapura or Peshawar. Kapishi, which is now located near Bagram in Afghanistan. This was one of the ancient world's largest producer of grapes. It was also a flourishing international trading hub where, goods and, other items poured in all the way from Rome, Khorasan, and Iraq. Next, we have Mulasthana or Multan, now in Pakistan, and it was one of the world's most ancient pilgrimage sites for Hindus. It was also a prosperous commercial center, which is roughly comparable to today's hubs like, say, Ludhiana, Surat, or Coimbatore. Next, you have Kabul and Jalalabad, Kandahar, Udbandapura, which is called Hund in Pakistan, then Pushkalavati, which is again in Pakistan. And we also have a busy forest route that connected Takshashila and Varanasi. And this route proceeded further and finally ended in Mithila, Bihar. Another important trading routes that began at Peshawar, it went towards Saharanpur and ended in Lucknow. Then there was another route that began at Lahore. It touched Batinda, then proceeded to Delhi, then crossed the Yamuna River at Delhi, and moved on towards Prayagraj, then to Varanasi, then to Bhagalpur, and finally culminated in Calcutta via Patna. There were also direct trading routes to Mathura from Rohtak and Rajgir, and for several centuries, it might come as a surprise, for several centuries, Mathura was known as the Emporium of India. In a roughly, to give it in contemporary terms, it was a shopping mall of India. And other well-connected commercial cities and towns, including the famous Buddhist site Shravasti, which was a commercial town as well as a Buddhist town. It was called the city of bankers. Then you had Magadha, Champa, Vaishali, Kaushambi, Kurukshetra, Sthaneshwara, which is Thanesar today in Haryana. Then you had Indraprastha, Kanyakubja, which is Kanauj, Ahitchatra, Ayodhya, Mahishmati, and all these routes finally converged at Ujjain. And Mahishmati or Maheshwar in Madhya Pradesh today, this was known as the gateway to the Deccan. And next we'll look at a similar list of routes quickly in western and southern India in the ancient times. So the route between Punjab, which includes Sindh, which is now part of Pakistan. So this route between Punjab and Gujarat, it passed through Malwa in Madhya Pradesh, and the route to Delhi, Ajmer and Ahmedabad passed through central Rajasthan. This was also the natural road from Rajasthan to South India or to the Deccan, and it was also the most prolonged and busy theater of countless wars and campaigns of conquest. So now when we come to Ujjain, we again notice another mind-boggling road network, and I'll just mention only two in the space of this session. One branch of the highway passing through the port cities on the western coast of Bharuch and Supparaka, which is known as Sopara in Maharashtra. So this route which cut through, which touched Bharuch and Supparaka, it reached Mathura again. So you see the importance of Mathura. And it reached Mathura via Ujjain, and another branch cut through the densely forested Vidisha. It proceeded through the Betwa River Valley and reached Kaushambi in Bihar. And next, when we turn to South India, the first thing that strikes us once again is a kind of amazing geographical knowledge that our ancestors had. And the trading and commercial routes, various trading centers in South India, all of them followed the natural course of rivers, and this is something that we notice even today. So one of the busiest routes was a direct passage that connected Manmad in Maharashtra and Machilipatnam in Andhra. Other major routes were between Kanchipuram and Pune, and between Goa, Nagapatnam and Tanjavur, and between Kozhikode and Rameshwaram. Another significant and enduring ancient trading route that has largely remained intact even till date, it began at Warangal, it passed through Vijayawada, it cut all the way through Orissa and finally terminated at the mouth of the Bay of Bengal, and it might be interesting to examine the route details of what is today known as National Highway number 16. So back to ancient India, all these road networks offered some really amazing crisscross connectivity between all major rivers of South India, such as Godavari, Kaveri, Bhima, Krishna, Tungabhadra, and Penna. It might also be surprising to know that for several unbroken centuries, Ujjain enjoyed the same prestige as the Greenwich Mean Time, which was evolved as a global time standard, at the height of colonial Britain's economic dominance in the world. Another distinctive features of all these ancient trading routes was the fact that they linked most of the olden capital cities with one another, and as I say, politics is intimately linked with economics and vice versa. So When these capitals, changed due to several reasons, wars, famines, drastic changes in economic activity, social upheavals, change in the course of rivers, several other reasons, all these old trading routes were sometimes abandoned or new routes were built. So the ultimate point of this rather detailed survey of just the major commercial routes that had existed for countless centuries throughout ancient India was just to provide some hard evidence for what follows, that is the extraordinary mobile system of business called sartha or caravans. All sarthas or caravans plied on all these routes without exception. So we'll look at that in the next section. So in practice, a sartha literally meant a group of merchants who invested equal amount of capital and carried on trade with outside markets traveling in a caravan. And in fact, the starting of a sartha was an extremely important, prestigious, and even a highly auspicious event in the Indian business community of ancient and early medieval India. Typically, an ambitious or an adventurous businessman would announce his intent to begin a sartha or a caravan, and he outlined its financial and other objectives to the community. So those who listened to this, his proposal, if they were interested, these businessmen would come forward, they would pool in their own capital and begin the enterprise after preparing an elaborate charter containing rules and regulations governing the sartha or caravan. This is comparable to memorandum and articles of association or company incorporation documents, if we have to use a contemporary idiom. So establishing and organizing a sartha was the only method of carrying on trade and commerce with distant lands, including international trade. From a very limited perspective, it can be said that the sartha was the first system of multinational corporations to originate from ancient India. One sartha or caravan could comprise as less as 500 wagons or carts and as many as 5 or even 7,000 carts. So in such extensive and long sarthas, if the head of the sartha was in Varanasi, for example, its tail would be somewhere in Kanchipuram. So this is another reason I gave a fairly detailed commercial geography of that period, all the different trading links and routes. Now we'll look at some of the main features and components of a typical sartha. Normally, a sartha was divided into the following categories. The first was a bandi sartha, which was a caravan which carried only goods. You had a bahalika sartha, which consisted of donkeys, oxen, mules, camels, and other animals. You had a bharavaha sartha, in which the caravan members had to carry their own loads. You also had an audarika sartha, which entirely comprised of laborers in search of livelihood, and they wandered from one place to another. They would shift, their jobs from one caravan to other. And then you had the karpatika sartha, which was entirely, exclusively comprised of monks, sadhus, mendicants, and so on. And the generic name for goods that were carried, transported in a sartha was called vidhana. And these goods were broadly classified as follows. Category name I'll tell and give a brief list. So the first was something called a ganima, which included items such as myrobalan, areca nuts, peaches, cherries, and so on. The second was the dharima, which could be weighed. So goods which could be weighed, such as sugar. Then you had meya, which could be measured using some measuring utensils, such as a measuring pot or some such things. And typical items that fell under this category were rice, ghee, butter, and so on. And finally, you also had the parichedya, or items which could be tested only by eyes. Goods such as clothes, indigo, dyes, precious stones, pearls, corals, and so on. Other categories, miscellaneous categories, you had goods like luxury items like aloe, and an astonishing range of perfumes, sandalwood, musk, magenta, cinnabar, conches, rare seashells, ivory, gold, silver, corals, etc. So the chief of a Sartha was known as a Sarthavaha, which literally means one who carried the caravan, and typically the Sarthavaha or the caravan leader was also the person who founded the Sartha from the scratch and was responsible for its entire functioning. And even a high-level study of the functions of a Sarthavaha or the caravan leader is nothing short of mind-boggling. And this caravan leader, he represents one of the finest pinnacles of business leadership that was entirely homegrown, and our contemporary corporate leaders might greatly benefit to make an exhaustive study of these genius-level business leaders of ancient India. Remember, this was a tradition that was sustained for more than 3,000 years. So I'll just give you a brief summary, and I can think of nothing better than these to quote the evocative words of this great scholar, Vasudeva Sharan Agarwal. So he says, and I quote, "In the golden farm of Indian trade, the picking was done by the caravan leader. Rich in organizing skill, truthful, he was a treasure house of courage, ready to grapple with fresh problems. He was replete with common sense. He was magnanimous. He was a bestower of wealth. He was deeply interested in religion and culture and fine arts. He was an expert in the knowledge of his own country and foreign lands. This caravan leader rubbed shoulders with foreigners such as the Yavanas, Shakas, the Pahlavis, and so on. Caravan leaders were masters of their languages and customs, and the Indian caravan leaders extended their activities from Tamralipti in Bay of Bengal to Antioch in Syria, from Java to Kedah, and to the ports of Cholamandala and to Alexandria and East African ports. The Sarthavaha and his activities present a moving picture of 2 millennia of Indian trade." So within this expansive Sartha, the Sarthavaha further organized his caravan into nimble little units. And, I can just go on and on. The level of detail is just too much. And Sarthas also had, they were not just limited to land routes. They also had, they also operated on sea routes, on the sea. They were called maritime Sarthas. You had various technical terms signifying, both in Sanskrit and other Indian languages, signifying extensive knowledge of nautical science that ancient India had. So I think I'm mostly coming to an end of this session. So before I close, I'll just make a few closing points. Yeah, so like I said, this is a truly encyclopedic subject, and I sincerely hope that my presentation so far has kindled enough interest to pursue it in a more detailed fashion. And I do believe that this area has great value in light of India's re-emergence in the last 7 or 8 years as a global force to reckon with. And ancient India's overall global dominance for centuries must be studied once again from this geographical and commercial trading dimension, and must be properly contextualized for our own time. And I think on that note, I will conclude my brief presentation. I hope you all took some value from it. I once again offer my heartfelt thanks to the India Foundation, to Shri Ram Madhav, Rami Desai, and all of you in the audience. Namaste.